Итак, друзья, доброе утро.
Well, all right then. Good morning, everyone, and sorry for the delay. Well, it was not because of our negligence. I am Kirill Tokarev. It's a pleasure to see you all here. So let's get started. Every generation, both our generation and its predecessors, have to encounter lots and lots of challenges and victories, and the 20th century was rich in them, and so is the 21st. Oh, well, I am not quite sure but I'm quite sure people who lived back in 13th century would say that theirs was a very challenging century too. Well, so whoever we are facing a rather challenging change these days in terms of economics, social situation, and psychology. I guess the main driver is technology, but not just them. Today, with our splendid speakers and panelists, we are going to try and understand what are the global trends that will drive changes in the decades to come. And we are not going to limit this discussion just to technology. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time, but let us try and use it to the utmost. So I'm not going to bore you to death. Let me introduce our panelists. Today we have with us Mr. Maxim Oreshkin, Minister of Economic Development of the Russian Federation, Daron Avni, Director of Government Relations, Google, Europe, Middle East and Africa. Yaroslav Kuzminov, Principal of the Higher School of Economics, Russian Federation. Ksenia Yudaeva, First Deputy Chairperson of the Central Bank of Russia. Dominik Hosh, board of the chairman of the board Russian Technology Fund, Una Sarita, professor of Global Higher School of Economics, editor-in-chief Foresight magazine. Maxim, you seem incredibly popular today, like a good rock star. So I guess we will give the floor to you first. So these days we are witnessing the fourth technology revolution, as some people say. So to what extent is the global economy ready for it? What are the global economic trends, and what is the place occupied by Russia? So it's the fourth global technology revolution. I would say that the economy is very well ready for it. It will keep changing like it has been changing. I would like to touch upon three trends that will drive lives of people present here today. The first trend is an economic one. The global economy. In recent decades, the global economy has been changing its added value structure. 50 years ago, 100 years ago, the role of capital in industrial production was of utmost importance. But these days, the share of services is roughly 80%. At that, if you look at the entire value creation chain from the creation of a product through its consumption, you'd have to concur that the majority of added value forms it during two phases, innovation and marketing. That means that overall in economy there have been cardinal changes, and the role of talent and individuum has been growing. Well, look, this is an iPhone. Let us look at its value drivers. You'd concur that it's concentrated in two phases. Now, the first one being design, technology solutions, and the other one is marketing. The cost of production of iPhone hardly reaches 40% of its total value, and the 40% is smeared along the value chain, so to speak. The majority of it is driven by raw materials. So the added value is concentrated in the design phase and the marketing phase. Let me repeat myself. If we look at companies with topmost capitalization across the world, that you'd concur that they are the companies like Google, whose representative we have here today, focusing on key phases I mentioned. So in the future, the global economy will encounter the following. That part of value that is driven by payment for ideas and innovations will keep growing. So the trend of increasing human role in the global economy will be there. Another trend is associated with change of generations and gradual changes of the global economy. If we look at values of different generations, then the generations that were born right after World War II and up until the Z generation, whose representatives are here today, people born after the year 2000, then the main trends are the desire to have wealth, apartments, cars, and so forth. That desire has been going down, and on the other hand, the desire for self-recognition is growing. They say your generation was born, people of your generation were born with iPhones in their hands. I remember cord phones, but you go through life with iPhones in hand, so your perception of information is cardinally different. Your ability to process information is cardinally different. So you are changing the global economy, and well, the global trend is switch over to the sharing economy. And from the standpoint of the entire global of that trend, well, the relative value of assets has been changing. So economy is trying to adapt to changing preferences of generations, and the greater the role of this new generation, then the greater the changes. And the third trend to mention is a combination of the first two to a large degree. We are switching over from state economies to city-driven economies. The growth of role of human capital in value creation means that the key role in economic success belongs to the development and realization of individual potential. For every human being to develop, a suitable environment is required. Interaction, networking, and so forth. So the role of environment is becoming more and more prominent in global leading cities that drive economy forward. Generation gaps impact development of cities, let me give you an interesting example of approach vision of real estate. Right after the war, your apartment was your fortress. It was the center of your universe. But these days, youngsters want to have not just a place to crash and sleep, but the entire space around you has to be comfortable. So there is this new notion, culture urbanism. These days, youngsters just refer to their apartments as places to sleep, whereas their lives are outside their apartments, in parks, theaters, and cafes. So they pursue their life outside their apartments. That changes cities to a great extent. That changes city environment to a great extent, and real estate too. So what we see these days is the following. Most competitive global economies are cities, and cities are starting to compete between themselves, trying to secure human talent and capital. And so there is the subnational league where cities compete, and to a large extent, world-leading cities do not depend on their respective states. That trend will become more and more pronounced because human population is becoming more and more mobile. Well, in recent years, it has grown by 40 to 50%. So what's the main conclusion? I guess the key driver of the global economy of the future and the key value of the global economy of the future is a human being. And so your main task is to develop your knowledge, your talent, your competencies from the standpoint of state policies, states that will focus on the development of environment suitable for evolution of human beings and mobility of human beings will be the winners of the global competition in 10, 20, 50 years from now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maxim Stanislavovich. We will have a Q&A session in the end, but just one question. What knowledge and what kind of competences will be in topmost demand in the future if the global economy follows the three trends you mentioned? Well, there is another important thing. It's not the importance of, subject-related knowledge. It's the importance of ability to learn, process large bulks of information, ability to communicate, network with other people. People who possess such skills will become more and more important in global economies. Yes, thank you much. So it's not about grammar, I guess, although I guess, they will remain in high demand for. The global economy has already made some significant breakthroughs in terms of development of artificial intelligence. So, Daron, my question goes, the next question is to you. People have been talking about the development of artificial intellect and mobile economies, and your company, the company you represent, Google, has played a significant role is that. What is the path to follow? What is the meaning of that these days? The human artificial intellect in its present condition, how is it going to change the global economy?
It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to all of you here today. And indeed, I'd like to focus on two trends. One is the shift to a mobile economy, and the second is artificial intelligence. And I'd like to start with a question to the audience here. Can you please raise your hand if you have a mobile device with you here today? I know you got one for free, so can you please raise your hand if you have two mobile devices with you today? Well, you got one for free, right? Do you have three mobile devices with you today? Whoa, that's impressive. 4? 5? Whoa. So I think it doesn't come as a surprise to you that mobile has become a real important part of our lives. In fact, a study that was done a couple of years ago showed that people are willing to give up chocolate, fast food, and even alcohol before they'll give up their smartphone. So today, I'd like to speak about these two trends, and I'd like to start with a pivotal moment that happened in October 2016. In October 2016 was the first time when mobile browsing overtook desktop browsing. This means that people started interacting with the internet with their mobile phones more than doing this with their desktops. And why is this important? Because companies like Google started developing apps and services thinking mobile first. We design our services first for mobile, and only then we think whether there's a need for a desktop app or not. Businesses are also designing campaigns thinking mobile first. So they address you guys on your mobile phones before they put up billboards. The global internet population is growing. Today we have about 3 billion people connected to the internet. In a few years' time, by 2020, we expect this number to grow to 5 billion people. Just imagine what kind of change this will create. And it's not just the number, it's also the intensity of using your mobile phone. On average, each person looks at their mobile phone 150 times a day for a total of 3 hours. That's a lot. And for you, it might be sounds kind of regular, you're digital natives. But in fact, this is a change that happened just in the past 10 years, since Apple launched the first mobile phone, mobile smartphone, back in 2007. Now at Google, with our Android phones and Android operating system, has been at the forefront of this revolution. And we created with Android a new approach. Android was the first open source, free platform that any device manufacturer can use for free without any Google involvement. And what we've seen that since we launched Android in 2008, today there are 2 billion people using Android phones. In fact, the phones you got for free are also Android phones. And what we also see is that Android created a huge variety of devices. You can now get 24,000 different Android devices out there from over 1,300 brands. And obviously, this kind of variety of devices drop the prices. So today I'm told that in Russia, you can get a smartphone for even 2,000 rubles, which is admirable. So in fact, Android created an opportunity for everyone to have a smartphone. Another trend that we see is how artificial intelligence integrates into smart mobile computing. Artificial intelligence, in a way, creates smart computers, smart in doing particular tasks. So if in the past we used to interact with our phones by touching them, today we can just have a conversation with our mobile phone, with the assistant on our mobile phone. So we can ask our assistant to schedule meetings for us, to send SMSs, and even to book a theater ticket or to book a place in my favorite restaurant. But what I like the most about artificial intelligence is the fact that it allows things that, just a year ago seemed to all of us science fiction. We could only see those in science fiction movies. 2 weeks ago, Google announced a new product. It's called Pixel Buds. It's earphones that you can listen to. Obviously, you can listen to great music. But I think one of the great features that Pixel Buds allows is to have a conversation with a person that doesn't speak your language. So you can instantly translate between 40 different languages, by the way, including Russian. And in fact, you have your personal translator in your pocket. So say you're in Italy and you want to order pasta like a pro. All you need to do is to put on your Pixel Buds, and then you call the Italian waiter, speak in Russian, the speaker on your phone translate into Italian, and when the Italian waiter speaks to you in Italian, you hear the translation in your Pixel Buds in Russian. And this is happening today. This is not science fiction. Just Google YouTube and search for Pixel Buds, and you see this in action. So this is some of the cool things that can now happen with artificial intelligence. But I think the most important trend is artificial intelligence is becoming something for everyone. It's not just for the Googles of the world. So Google opened up our artificial intelligence capabilities for developers around the world, for young entrepreneurs like yourself. So if, for example, a developer wants to integrate Google translation capabilities into their own app, all this developer has to do is to integrate artificial intelligence AI, artificial intelligence tools that Google has. It's called APIs. And instantly, they have this translation capability in their own app. So years ago, they had to spend thousands of hours, millions of dollars, hire an army of PhDs from the university to do that. And today, they can do this instantly. These two trends, mobile first and artificial intelligence, create huge opportunities for you, young entrepreneurs. There's a whole new industry of applications created around them. And I'd like to give you one example that we're very proud of coming out of Russia. A new app called Hadway. It's a startup that was born in Russia, in the Ural Mountains. It never changed its location, but most of its revenues come from Asia and the United States, 95% of its revenue. And this app was created to improve safety when you drive your car. In fact, it became last year one of the 10 global most promising projects in the auto industry. The Hadway example, what I want you to take out of this, shows that the notion of export has become outdated. We don't need to think about export any longer because all the apps are global from day one. With a few clicks, you can sell your apps to the whole world. Russia also have a great local demand for apps. And in fact, we see that Russian users are at the 5th place in the world in terms of the number of apps they download from Google Play. And also, it's important to note that developing apps is a good business. When you look at the region of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Russian developers come at the top of developers who make more than $1 million a month just from selling their apps on Google Play. So something to think about, you young entrepreneurs. Obviously, this has huge impact on the economy, and a study that we've done with Reich Association and a consulting firm, OCNC, showed that the mobile economy in Russia already drives 4% of Russian GDP. That's 48 billion rubles a year. That's a lot. And it also creates jobs. So more than 1.2 million jobs were created in Russia by the mobile economy. And we expect that in the next 5 years, 430,000 more jobs will be created. We also believe at Google that this opportunity of the mobile world and of digital should be shared by everyone. And that's why we're doing all sorts of projects that I'm very proud of to drive this effort. In Africa, which is part of my region, we recently announced that we trained more than 1 million people around Africa with digital skills. And here in Russia, we're doing a program together with Sberbank. It's called Business Class, where we train small and medium businesses across the whole of Russia, from west to east, from north to south, on digital skills, and we aim to reach 100,000 businesses in the next couple of years. So to conclude, I think that mobile economy, together with artificial intelligence, remember the pixel buds, create exciting opportunities for all of you here sitting and sharing this great opportunity to exchange ideas today. I think everyone has a role to play here. The government, civil society, academia, and obviously private sector. And it's a great opportunity for you, the young audience here, the developers of tomorrow. And I think together we can create an environment where the young generation can use technology to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Спасибо, Дарон. Очень убедительно.
Thank you, Doron. I'd like to make a comment. I was talking about marketing, by the way, and you've noticed how many times my colleague mentioned the new product which we produce. Thank you. Well, Google not only develops new products, it sells them, of course. Yaroslav Ivanovich, we have no doubt here that we are in a process of a permanent revolution, which is gaining force, and it's digitalization and mobile economy. Men ready for it? Are people ready for it? Are they actually following up, catching up with these new technologies? What's the future? Maxim has just pointed out that the main part of the value is created at the stage of production, including venture investments and venture capital and the production and project phases. This becomes more valuable at the stage of production and at the stage of marketing. Therefore, there are certain demands and requirements to man, to the people who are developing it all. These are the creation sciences, and that's why the system of education is adapting to these processes. I'd like to say a few words on the topic of the new economy. Maxim was talking about one characteristic feature, very important characteristic feature. I'm going to say a few words about the other one, which is also important for you all, for all of you gathered here. The information revolution from automatic translation to the cheap databases will bring about an information market. The products we are selling now are becoming less material, and there are markets which are to be less regulated by the government and can experience no problems with borders, with customs, and we are creating a market which allows us to create honest competition. Approximately 10 to 20 years ago, we never had that opportunity. Every one of you has the opportunity to win on the market with honest competition. So you're welcome. Join this market. And I'm going to say that what is going to be done in the sphere of education, the system of education is very inertial. The essence of the system of education is to translate the accumulated knowledge and to pick out the most valuable spheres. But right before our eyes, what we see currently and what is happening and is going to be happening within 10 to 12 years, we are going to see a shift and a revolution in education, a revolution which can only be comparable with the appearance of print and mass education in schools. What I mean is AI and cloud databases and knowledge bases. You know that technology is becoming cheaper and more accessible, and we think that within 5 to 7 or 9 years in the future, these technologies will become accessible to the common public, to the public at large, and they will topple the currently existing methods in education. They will topple approximately 90% of such methods which had been formulated in the 17th or the 18th century. They were built on the following: the child has to solve problems, accumulate knowledge with the right answer presupposed. So if you turn to artificial intelligence or cloud technology, a child will be able within 1 minute give a number of versions of the right answer, and the teacher will not be able to understand whether the child or the cloud the child uses had been able to solve the problem. The schools, the way we are used to them, are going to be toppled, as I said. The second is electronic educational materials, which allow to personalize the process of education. It's going to be a tailor-made educational process for every child. Well, of course, there's a question whether an electronic device will be able to substitute a paper-based textbook. I'm sure that in 5 to 7 years this will be the case, because an electronic device, an electronic textbook, will be able to correlate with the child and see whether the child or the student is succeeding in solving the problems. And it's going to act as an individual teacher, an individual tutor. This is reality. It's going to need serious investment into the educational system, but it's a reality. And the other reality is teaching technology. We all we're all unhappy in many countries with the fact that professional colleges keep teaching us old, outdated technologies. And when you enter the market after graduating such a college, you come face to face with the reality and you have to retrain yourself. Now there is a possibility and an opportunity in teaching pilots and other experts in different fields. There is a software with universal simulators which allow you to find yourself in the place operating any kind of device and any kind of technology. And this is going to be accessible to everyone. These are going to be, the software is going to be changed with time and it's going to be variously packaged, but nevertheless, we are going to answer the demands of the growing markets, and in 10 to 15 years, this technology will be available, as it will be quite inexpensive. Electronic libraries, we see a lot of students here. People stop going to libraries to read paper books. They go to libraries to work with computers, with electronic databases. And the universities have not died. It's even becoming more interesting to work in universities. We are becoming more interested in each other, so to say. And the last but not least is the system of national exams. We have a blockchain technology which we are using. There are the blockchain technology is developed in the spheres where there are enough resources to pay for them. But as soon as blockchain technology becomes a mass technology accessible to everyone, they are going to be disseminated in the sphere of education. People are going to form and make their electronic portfolios. The academic results will be uploaded onto the system, starting with your initial interests as a child, participation in different competitions, so on, so forth, which means that enrollment into universities is going to be based on this portfolio.
It will be based on your portfolios, and that will be a great stimulus to people to pursue their development for the sake of future markets. I believe I've touched upon 4 or 5 new trends that are becoming less and less obvious. They're there, but they're just too expensive these days. In 4 or 5 years, they will become new reality, which in turn will drive new economy and new culture. Thank you, Yaroslav. Yes, I guess, we could or could not, or should or should not envy teachers of the future. Some research indicates that in 20 to 30 years from now, students or pupils will not be able to lie to unless you have a special software. You'll just have to be created. Yes, hardware and software will have to help cheaters out. That might help. Ksenia, my next question goes to you. Yaroslav Ivanovich said that new industries keep emerging and the governments find it harder and harder to regulate those. There is some competition. Cryptocurrencies, blockchain is there already, and a huge number of other technologies is becoming less and less, more and more pronounced. So what is the role of governments in this environment? Technology trends, what are they? Something the governments have to adapt to, ban, or help? What's your vision? Yes, my question goes to Ksenia. Yes, thank you so much. Well, I guess I'm supposed to speak from a conservative stance. Not necessarily. Well, that is sort of a trend for the central bank in. Well, I have to say that, let me tell a slightly different thing. Let us look back 40 to 50 years. Back then, the financial sector. If we take a look back, we will conclude that the financial sector has been changing on the back of new technologies and their implementation. 50 years ago, the financial sector was completely different from what it is these days. Some things are still there, but you know what I mean. That's one thing. Another thing to mention, quite often changes in the financial sector ultimately impact it not the way that had been intended up front. 45 to 50 years ago, people installed first ATM, automated teller machines. Back then, they were breakthrough innovations, and people believed that the installation of ATMs will kill off bank offices because there will be no need for people to cash out or accept money bills. What do we see these days? Do we see that there are less bank offices? I don't know, more or less, I don't know, but we can see that there are lots and lots of bank offices everywhere. Half of their floor area is occupied by ATMs, but the other half is still occupied by people engaging with clients in a man-to-man manner and rendering direct services to them. So that means that changes have taken place, but they did not exactly go as forecasted. You have to understand that whenever there is a new technology, we never know upfront how it is going to change businesses and economies. And some ideas may be different, and they may not go true. Let us now get back to the financial sphere. This 4.0 revolution has impacted the financial sphere in the following way. 3 new technologies. The first one, whatever is associated with payment services. The revolution has been in full swing for quite a while, and the hot topic of the day is the technology of distributed registers. Well, blockchain is a subtype of that technology. The distributed registers technology is wider than blockchain and can be realized in a variety of manners. Number 2, things associated with a use of big data or data at large. Well, they have always used data and worked with data in the finance sector. That is the essence of the finance sector. Use of data in order to manage risk. That is the essence of the financial sector and its existence. So once big data processing technologies became available, finance people started using them in an active manner in marketing, pretty much like everywhere else, and in management of risks, because that, as I said, is a function of topmost importance too. And in consulting, of course, my apologies, forgot to mention that, well, consulting and marketing is pretty much the same. The third technology is... It's not exactly a payment service, it's algorithmized transactions. Algorithms, high-frequency trade, financial markets. Well, it has been there in the financial market for quite a while, evolves quite rapidly. It's a third noticeable type of technologies in the finance sector that is being used by people in a very active manner. So what's the role of regulators and governments in that whole powwow? And by regulators, I mean a wide variety of specific institutions. Well, the role is pretty much universal. Try to drive topmost use of positive aspects, limiting risks imposed by those technologies. From the standpoint of improvement of efficiency, there are always 2 things to keep in mind. The first one, Well, governments render services, they're service providers too. From the standpoint of finance sector, state banks usually owns interbank payments, settlement systems. So in that sense, central banks must be capable of using technologies, applying their own technologies. They must be capable of interacting with finance institutions using technologies. They must be capable of playing organizer and facilitator role. This is what we've been doing recently. We have business associations. We keep developing new wholesale retail payment systems, master chain technologies. These are things we work on these days. The other thing is equally important, issues associated with standardization of things. Look, let us have a look back 150 years ago. Remember, they introduced the metric system. Well, the imperial system is still in use in some countries, but overall it's the metric system worldwide. So there are 2 or 3 measurement systems that are used worldwide, like electric current system and so forth. A lot of things were standardized back then, and I am fully convinced. I believe that standardization, it gave the momentum to the development of industrial production. Without it, there wouldn't have been industrial production or breakthrough of the 20th century. This is what we've been witnessing in the finance sector these days. These days, they are developing standardized methods of identification of people and companies. Remote identification, standardization of a variety of indices, and those things enable financial markets and data processing systems perform in a more efficient manner. So the role of coordinator belong to governments or sub-governmental organizations. That's very important. Well, they have this kind of global company and identify the lay-in index. Well, it will help register transactions worldwide in a correct manner, because all companies involved in international transactions will have their identifiers assigned within the framework of that global ID system. And my third thing to mention is things to fight. Risks, of course. Regulators have to fight them. What are the risks? Technology-related risks. Well, the new ones emerge as new technologies emerge, or old risks can reshape themselves. What are the new risks? Cyber risks, naturally, and operations-related risks associated with operations of hardware, algorithms, when I guess you know what I mean. Viruses, hacker attacks, and so forth. Well, I'll bet each and every one of you has encountered those more than once. Naturally, it's a very important issue these days in the beginning of the 21st century, and regulators cannot just stand aside and watch them. And so they are now discussing cybersecurity standards for a variety of organizations and ways to enhance international cooperation in that sphere. Subnational technologies we have to deal with. So international cooperation is very important, and international cooperation and collaboration issues are becoming more and more important. There are new old topics, data protection, for instance. Well, we leave our data everywhere. Anywhere on the web, and it's splendid that Google uses that, but you need to realize that your personal data can be used against you. So, do you really want this data to be misused? Yes, well, it can be used to analyze your financial risks, your fitness for some special jobs or positions. Lots of issues there. So regulators are introducing some serious limitations in order to make people owners of their data again. So last year they passed this new regulation in Europe. It will take effect fairly soon. Under that directive, all financial organizations must protect the right of human beings to own their personal data and use it in marketing only subject to consent of data owners and explicit permits. So the entire industry has been on pins and needles recently because it's not quite clear how this is going to work, and we've gotten used to using data the way we see fit. So there has been a lot of regulatory changes, serious changes recently. And there is this fairly conventional topic. There is this topic conventional to every regulator: financial risks associated with new technologies, and some risk types. Well, they just stay on. Increased debt. That's a risk. The bubble in any way. M&M bills, electronic bubbles, but whatever the format, bubbles are bubbles, and naturally, regulators, bubbles constitute serious issues, and we need to give credit where it is due. Some modern technologies can produce bubbles. We need to realize that, for instance, the robotization of operations, AI, machine-based training and education. Look, if all the algorithms are standardized and they fish for same things, they will create bubbles, they will produce bubbles. Recently, somebody gave me a good example. All the systems, management, motion of traffic, Google Maps, Yandex Maps, systems you use to manage and organize road traffic and choose the direction you move in. But if you redirect the traffic jam from place A to place B and everybody follows the directions of a system, then your traffic jams just relocate, but they will not be done away with, right? Because, well, everybody resorts and uses the same software. So, fairly same thing in the finance sector. If your algorithms are identical, that will produce bubbles, or otherwise that will drive serious financial crashes. Well, the first technology crisis took place back in 1987. Many of you were not born yet. Well, technologies made financial markets in the States and in Europe collapse. So there is a challenge. We need to understand that there are technologies, but in addition to companies must understand what technologies they use, because there is this risk that technologies will be used by users who do not understand the potential outcome of such technologies. On the other hand, regulators can use technologies to their benefit, detect some poor transactions, bad transactions, such as money laundering and stuff. So and another thing to mention is old risks existing in new systems, risks in the field of competition. Yaroslav gave us a splendid picture: global market, wider competition. Let me use some professional slang. Such technologies have an interesting feature. They a growing economy of scale is their common feature. In the end of the day, they drive the formation of larger players. Google is a relatively young company, but some new giants are now dominating the market rather than a variety of smaller companies. Yes, lots and lots, numerous smaller companies, and generally speaking, these days it's quite obvious that the risk is there will be no large number of smaller companies. There will be a couple, a handful, if not one, super giants. So competition risks in the technology-driven world are there. That's global companies, not national companies, that can dominate the market with all the repercussions for global and national competition. So there is a huge challenge to regulators in that area. Not how best to regulate that, but how best to collaborate in order to allow economies and people assure topmost benefits on the back of technologies, minimizing traditional risks and minimizing risks driven by technologies in their new phase. Yes, that and I will wrap up. Yes, I could respectfully disagree. I beg to differ with all due respect. Well, just a word or two. You see, the concentration trend has always existed in economy. It existed during the coal period, steel period, automobile period. It has always been there. During the digital phase, it's always there too. It's just huge providers of mass-oriented services, and that trend will, the concentration trend will persist. But I think that free markets have more chances. You know why? Because upgrades of technologies usually take place every 18 months to 2 years. It used to be 5 to 7 years. Now it's a year and a half. My colleagues have just mailed me a letter of information, composition of innovative research industries updated by 40% every year. That only means new services, creative services or engineering services, whatever. That means that such digital services will keep being produced faster than, and there will be huge concentration. There will be competition, but new markets will keep emerging.
Allow me to disagree. Actually, I don't think that we are contradicting each other to a great extent. Of course, there are spheres where new technologies emerge and develop, and new businesses. 50 years ago, that was physics. Now it's electronics, biology. In 50 years, something else. But nevertheless, I was actually talking about a scaling of economy and a large-scale economy. I was talking about the network services and monopolies in this area. You need a particular service to be used by the majority of the population. And in the payment system, the more people that pay through the payment system, the more it is important for you. If it doesn't have this characteristic, it becomes it's not useful anymore. So everything connected with payment systems, of course, has this effect. But as far as trading on the market is concerned, there might be other effects. There may be other small participants. But the external financial services and the Google browser, there is an algorithm on quite a number of numbers of browsing or translate. The translation system is working on the great number of users. The more users, the more higher quality it produces. Therefore, this is my point of view. Dominique, would you like to say a few words about that? You have quite a lot of experience in the energy department, and your sphere was always innovative. But I know that you wanted to begin with something else. Good afternoon. usually people say that a Frenchman is an Italian in a bad mood. Actually, I'm in a very good mood. I see a lot of young people here, and I really want to communicate with you. The new product, the new Google product, the buds that we were talking about, Pixel bugs that we were talking about that produce translation. Well, I never had this opportunity, so I started learning Russian, and now I can speak Russian. It's much easier and safer in business in Russia, I must say. I've been working in Russia for 25 years, heading some huge energy companies, Schlumberger, oil and gas, Enel, and other companies. Therefore, I know the market very well. I was in the council of the market, and I don't want to talk about this in detail, but I would like to attract your attention to the fact that learning Russian means that you do not take an easy way out. You're not looking for an easy way out and a shortcut. And this poses a threat to us today. There's Paul Valéry, a philosopher, who is saying that modern life allows us to choose the easiest way, communication, instead of thinking processes. We need to think about that, whether this is right or wrong. When the president of a wonderful country such as the U.S. Is only expressing himself through Twitter, I think this is a shortcut. And I don't know, whether this system is beneficial in that respect. It is beneficial, of course, but it cannot substitute the thinking processes, thinking over an article in a newspaper or over a book. And this is a threat. I didn't really want to talk about that. I was going to say something else, and started thinking, and I remembered that there is a person who bought this small device in the hands of my neighbor, who made a very important speech, Steve Jobs. And this is his speech in Stanford. And I would like you to take a look and listen to what he said.
Which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing, so it was all made with typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. It was sort of like Google in paperback form 35 years before Google came along. It was idealistic, overflowing with neat tools and great notions. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth catalog, and then, when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and I was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
Это от меня низкий поклон перед этим человеком.
I'd like to express my gratitude to this person. I worship him, but that's the most important thing.
Я не хочу впасть в культ личности, но то, что ваш президент немножко сказал,
Well, actually, what he actually said is work for the future, make an effort, make an effort. So this is what brings forward certain consequences, which are called disruption, which means that you walk outside the framework and a particular order. Therefore, innovation is not a state initiative, because the state wants to preserve the framework. It wants to preserve the order. It doesn't want people to wander outside this framework. Take a look at many people who left this country. Where is the next Sergey Brin going to work? In Russia, or is he going to work with Google outside the country? So this is a great and important question for Russia today. Actually, I advise you to listen to Steve Jobs' speech on Google. There's even a translation into Russian. But this idea about disruption of order in university was put across very well. Actually, he left the university because he was kicked out of Apple, if you remember. And he said, in my career, that was the pivotal point. And the third thing he actually said, be foolish, be hungry. That's important words. Now about the situation in Russia. As I have been working here for 25 years and I know what is happening in the country, I would like to underscore 2 points, two important things. Innovation is not state-led, is not the state. You know, it's a catastrophe when the state is leading innovation. The state has to tackle such issues as order, the tax system, education, development of science. By the way, it's a great problem in Russia. I'm not going to comment on the issues of the Academy of Sciences and how to build how to construct financing of science. But unfortunately, elephants do not tango. So Gazprom is unfortunately channeling more money into football than science. And this is a serious problem for Russia. I consider it a serious problem for Russia. And we see, based on our experience, I'm one of the co-founders of the Antipolis in France, and we see that today innovations and development is based on small and medium-sized companies. And I heard your president saying that large companies have to be surrounded by a network of small and medium-sized enterprises. Because if the deputy head on innovation is being appointed, but there is no innovation per se, well, he's going to be a young beginner, so to say, or the initiator. I just wanted to put across some humor. I'm a Frenchman. I can leave the country at any time, so I can allow myself to joke that way. And but going back to the serious problem in Russia, that is the creation of a network of small and medium-sized enterprises, which will either create Google of tomorrow, of the future, and that's a question of whether Sergey Brin will be able to find a job for himself in Russia within the coming 20 years. This is a pivotal question, and it's an issue which your generation is going to resolve. Are you sure you're not Italian? You're not Italian, but a Frenchman. You are in a very good mood, I must say. I see that you have a very difficult task to summarize everything we've heard and discussed, and we've heard a lot. There's a lot to add, but nevertheless, I would like you to summarize and dwell on the trends, the key trends in the context of our discussion today.
Я тоже хочу говорить по-русски, но мне надо еще жить здесь.
I would actually like to speak Russian, but I'll have to live here for 20 more years in order to do so. So therefore, therefore, I'll speak English.
All the speakers and all the valuable comments, and would like to take a bit of a holistic picture of the situation. I'd like to bring you back to the present first, and then we will go back into the future. We need to understand our situation and what kind of systems we operate in. First of all, I'd like to begin with the question. How many of you live in cities? Cities. Got it. Most of you, right? Almost 80, 90 or more % of you. And you left your towns and villages. You moved to cities thinking that babushkas and dedushkas will always be there to feed you. Right? So there are about 15-20% of people living there now, largely elderly population, and you are hoping that actually they will keep feeding you in years and decades to come. Unfortunately, that will not happen, I would say. You would like to have fresh water, drinkable water. You would like to have energy, because we live in an energy age. So none of these technologies my colleagues mentioned can work without energy. So this needs to be generated somewhere. And you would like to live well, healthy, eat well, eat more meat maybe. Russian people like meat. So you would like to continue this habit and increase your quality of lives while constraining yourselves with a lot of resource limitations. So first of all, we need to understand the picture from this systemic perspective. Most of lives will still be in cities in the next decades to come. By 2050, there will be about 6 billion people living in cities out of 9.7 billion. By the 22nd century, we will have 9 billion people living in cities, which will be about 85% of the whole global population. So we need to consider how to survive in this sort of a system. We are talking about initiatives for sustainable development, saving the planet, and then protecting the environment. We should know that actually we should try to save ourselves. So the nature was there before us. Nature will exist after us. So the humanity's main challenge is actually to protect itself, I would say. So we have a grand challenge. We have a grand challenge in terms of demography, of this rapid urbanization, and the rural population is going down. We will face certainly some shortages about food, because in the year 2050 we will need 60% more food than we have today. So because of increasing population, not only because of increasing population, but also because of increasing lifestyles, because we would like to consume more, and we will be more hungry. We will consume 50 to 60% more water and the same amount of energy than we do today. So we need to understand all these challenges. And we live in a world, as we speak today, where there are 1 billion people without access to electricity. So 1 billion people in the same world we live in today live without electricity. And about 800 million of them have no access to healthy water. They need to walk at least 30 minutes a day in order to find some sort of drinkable water at home. So we have these challenges. We need to understand these challenges, and they all bring actually some kind of a systemic and complicated picture to us. What we need to do is that we have our lives, and we need to live this life in a smarter way, as smarter as possible. We have all the possibilities for new technologies, new economy, but at the same time, new technologies, new economy, new tools, new gadgets are not enough actually for us to address all these problems. We need to design some new concepts. There was a picture which I would show actually. It was showing the how people would live in the year 2000, and that was the picture from the 1899 year, so from the 19th century, showing how people would live in the 20th or 21st century. There was a flying machine, and then the flying machine actually was showing that we could hunt by air. So we could fly and then hunt the birds on the sky in the air, actually. So we could be flying with them, and we could just pick them very easily, right? So this was a very good illustration in terms of our limited thinking, saying that if we extrapolate the technology, and the whole life actually will improve also. But when you looked at this picture, you saw that actually there was an assumption that we would still go for hunting. So it would still be very popular. How many of you go for hunting now? Yes, one. Okay. Maybe that was by accident also, maybe not. So that is actually showing that we need to consider life as a whole. This person, for example, who was flying with this flight machine was wearing very old style kind of a dress and old style hat and then boots and things which we don't wear today. So we need to understand that the society, technology, economy, environment, politics, and culture, they evolve all together. And we need to actually consider about this system as a whole and then draw a better picture for the future. We live in 24 hours today, and we have a certain lifestyle. As most of us living in cities, we know that actually we are spending a lot of times in traffic, for example, and then we are spending a lot of times playing with our gadgets, and then we have very limited time actually to spend with our families, parents, and then we have little time to do physical exercises. So we have a lot of calorie intake living in big cities. We have a lot of exposure to chemicals and other biopollutants. And we have actually very limited time for healthy living. So what we need to do? What we need to do is that we need to develop some sort of a smart economy with new production systems, with more efficient systems, with more sustainable and circular systems, if you like. So what we mean by circular is that actually we would like to create some systems which uses the byproducts of other systems. In industry, this is called industrial symbiosis. So one industry uses the byproduct of other industries as an input material. So this system is actually taking place in some of the countries. If you look at Sweden today, which is probably a very good example to look at, so we are lucky that actually there are some countries in the world which are already doing. Sweden is the only country in the world which imports garbage from other countries, right? Sweden has managed to actually recycle 99% of its garbage with only 1% of landfilling, and then it is importing garbage from Norway and the United Kingdom. And this proportion in other countries is the opposite. So 99% of landfill in Mexico, for example. So I had the chance to look at the OECD countries. I'm thinking that in Russia, probably landfill is very high, the rate of landfill. So we need to actually develop this sort of sustainable and smart systems. So we can save 1 billion, not only 1 billion actually, many billions by bringing this sort of circular economy into the system. So only last year, for example, more than 1.8 billion phones were sold. So in about 2 or 3 years' time, all will be in our drawers. So actually sitting there because we will have a next generation of mobile phone in our pockets. But what will happen is that we have also great opportunities. So we have all the technologies that my colleagues have mentioned. We have new information and communication systems, new economy, new education systems. better systems for providing health and social services. So we need to take advantages of this. What we need to understand is that the aim is not technology, or technology is not aim. It's not the end. Technology is means of doing something. So we will use technology in a smarter way to make sure that we are developing some smart and sustainable lives and lifestyles in these cities and megapolis that we are living in. If my colleague, or if we meet here in the next 10 years probably, and if my colleague from Google asks the same question, let's say in the year 2030, how many of you have mobile phones? We will probably see no hands. So the paradigm will have already changed. So we will have other technologies. There are really exciting technologies in terms of Internet of Everything, for example, like adding humans into communication systems and interacting with machines, and human brain-to-brain interaction systems, which will actually make most of the devices we use today obsolete. There are already technologies which I'm actually watching very closely through my colleagues at the University of Drexel in the US, in Philadelphia. So we can already see how much information I was able to communicate with you, how much actually of the things you have understood what I said, from what I said. So some revolutionary technologies in terms of education. Imagine a teacher who can go into class and can see actually which student understood the topic and which student didn't understand the topic, or to what extent. So the student got probably 60% of what the teacher said, or 100%. So it will be possible actually to use or to picturize and then digitalize all this information, so we can actually help each other to learn better, to be more competitive, to save our resources. If a student didn't learn in class, for example, this student needs to spend more time to study, right? And time is our most precious, probably, resource among all this. So there are a lot of things actually to say and to discuss, but with this very limited time, I would like to say that we need to have this kind of a systemic perspective. We need to design our future. We need to show actually how this social, technological, economic, environmental, political, and cultural systems work all together. How we can improve the 24 hours of our day. How we can use most of our time in a more productive, creative, and entrepreneurial way. So these are our challenges, and we should use all these tools, technologies, and concepts for this purpose. I'd like to emphasize again that these are not the ends, but they are the means for better quality of life. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Yes, thank you so much. Indeed, the clock is ticking and we are rapidly running out of time. I have a huge number of questions I'd love to ask you, but I think I shall refrain. And yes, well, I'll open for questions. But before we open for questions, I think we should make this a bit more interactive. Well, right now you'll see a link on the screen. Please use it to answer a question. Which statements have the most significant potential for future economic transformations? It's multiple choice. Generalizations, they will be fairly comprehensible, I think. And trends or generalization forecasts, whatever the name. Number one, switch over to pleasure economics, crypto world, cryptocurrencies, substituting digital republics, digital competitions, AI, and so forth. Network societies, society without corporations, flexible labor organization systems, making every worker entrepreneur, avatars, complete submergence in virtual retired period of aged people because of radical 2.0 person, human 2.0 new technologies allow improving human capabilities, for instance, brain implants, brain interfaces of the elderly. And right now, well, you can see that, well, there are some tentative results. They already show on this screen, so take your time to vote. And meanwhile, we'll open for questions. Q&A, ladies and gentlemen. No mic, no translation. Let's not forget about that. And please introduce yourselves. Yes, good morning. I'm Arseny. I've been living in the Czech Republic, working in the public sector. My question goes to the Minister of Economic Development. I travel the world a lot, and I travel Russia a lot. Let me give you, well, do you know there is this city in Ivanovo? It used to be referred to as the capital of textile, but that area has been hardly flourishing these days. They purchase fabric from China, unfortunately, poor quality merchandise. And, well, I see that in many small businesses and medium-sized businesses, the situation is unfortunately the same. What's your question about? Please listen me out. Well, we don't have much time. Yes, point taken. What measures do you have in mind to support smaller businesses and medium businesses? And what's your contribution in the development of economy in Russia? My second question concerns education. I heard that education will keep improving and everything is swell, but I don't think that the Bologna system is very acceptable, and I am not quite sure how teachers manage to exist with 20,000 rubles per day. They say 60,000, but that's not what evidence suggests. When teachers are going to be given better social statuses, and when will you pursue the development economy so that there is no outflow of brains? Well, this is hardly the topic we have been discussing, so I will understand my colleagues if they decline to answer. Please. Yes, I will gladly answer about this textile capital, the city of Ivanovo. Well, Deputy Minister of Economic Development has been sent to that city, and he became governor of that region. Let us wish him every success, because he has rolled up his sleeves and, well, ready to get going. Well, about smaller businesses, that's mostly about people working and, well, right you are, governments should not pursue innovations, they should pursue creation of environments for smaller businesses to flourish and have access to cash, compete. And this is what we have been doing. I'm not going to go into every detail, but successes of smaller businesses is not about governments, it's about people engaged in those businesses. That's most important. Yaroslav, would you care to answer? My understanding, the colleague immigrated to Europe, in order to do battle with the Bologna system. Well, as to the status of teachers, then I really do believe there have been some significant changes in the regions. Well, 20,000 rubles, well, that's history already. And on average, a teacher in Russia, gets 90 to 90% of the average wage in these days. Teachers' wages are defined by a way of increasing workloads. So on the one hand, well, teachers make more these days, I promise you, but on the other hand, teachers are compelled to work in harder environments because they have to spend more time on every student, whether good or bad, and they have to 26 to 24 hours to teach every week in order to get paid more. That's physically impossible. So our next step to take is maintain higher level of wages at while maintaining conventional levels of workloads. Then situation will get back to normal. Thank you. Next. Over to you. Yes, Tatiana Romanishina, Serpukhov town, Moscow region. My question concerns the first presentation of today. Well, you say that you put a lot of emphasis on the development of larger cities. What about smaller cities and towns, and what are the criteria to define the quality of management of those cities that are most irrelevant these days? Smaller cities must be developed in conjunction with larger cities. Strange as it may seem, evolution of larger cities can drive life quality improvements in smaller towns. Let us talk about health protection, for instance. Unfortunately, it is physically impossible to have world-class doctors in every town or settlement. So, with new technologies, what can we achieve? If health protection services development is pursued in larger cities, if quality of work of health protection professional is higher, gets higher in cities, then with telemedicine technologies, people could go to their local outpatient clinics, and their tests can be mailed or communicated to higher quality professionals to cities, and then the conclusions and recommendations get back. Well, then, you know what I mean. Development of services in cities will drive improvements of life in towns. Definitely, that will play a very significant and relevant role. Well, because we need towns remain places where people would like to reside, including elderly people. But let me repeat myself. Forward development must be concentrated in cities. But the ties and conjunction is very important. Yes, thank you so much. And Mother Russia is not the only country on the globe with that kind of approach, by the way. Maxim, my question goes to you. My question concerns the realization of the cluster policy. It was launched back in 2011. And what is your assessment of the outcome? Well, is this... Well, Yulia, I come from the Republic of Tatarstan, and this is an impromptu question, the cluster approach. Well, you see, I have just touched upon cities. Well, people get together in cities, companies get together in cities. So, support to clusters. We have innovation clusters in, it's being actively pursued in the city of Kazan, and they have a university there. They try to pursue that area with a due level of communication between people. That's a good thing. Colleagues, are there any questions addressed to other panelists? Well, I know that the minister is rock star these days, but yes, over to you, buddy. Good afternoon. My name is Igor. My question is, I'm come from the city of Omsk. My question is addressed to Ksenia. In order for smaller businesses and medium businesses to develop, there must be affordable financial instruments such as loans in the near future. renewable facility lines at 3 to 5% per annum. Will they be available? These days, it's 10 to 12% per annum interest, by the way. And if yes, then when? So, well, global trends are less interesting. So, when are they start to give cash? Well, I expected this kind of question. When are you going to bring interest rate down? This is the question we get all the time, by the way. Well, you know, as to cost of resources, I'm here to tell you the following. Each and every one of us plays a dual role, the lender and the borrower. As lenders, we give our, we deposit our money in banks, or you buy some financial instruments. And the younger you are, the, well, my 80-year-old auntie doesn't do that. Youngsters do that these days. Would you be ready to lend your money at 3% to a bank? Apparently not. Then, if that is true for you, then it should be true for banks. Then the only answer is subsidies, and I would have to divert the question to the minister. In normal economies, well, the target inflation level is 4%, well, interest rate 3%. That would be exotic, I would say. That would be a sign of some crisis processes. If we go into negative interest rates under normal conditions. Thank you. Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have lots of questions. I would address to the minister about interest rates, economy policies, dollar exchange rate, future of the oil industry. But we are here today to talk about global trends. Don't forget about that. And, well, what about foreign participants? Are there any questions? Over to you now.
Hello, my name is Ben. I'm from Israel. I want to refer to what you talked about how humans consume, and it's about to be higher and higher. What does countries or global countries can do to make people to consume less, and what companies like Google do to educate to this subject? Because as a consumer, you see when you go to the network, you can see that when you search for something, advertisements are popping up and ask you to buy a lot of stuff. What can Google as a company do to make sure that the global population will consume less and less in a way to think about the future?
Actually, I'd like to destroy the taboo of sustainable living is being hungry. Or starving and eating less or living less or something like that. It is not any of this, okay? So we won't be dying starving but living in a kind of a green village or something like that. So we will be feeding ourselves well in a good quality, and then taking enough calorie intake, for example, and not to take excessive. We have all the devices, for example, which can show us how much calorie we take, how much steps we take, for example, during the day, and how our physical, psychological conditions are, because it's not only physical condition, actually. We need to have a good physical condition, body, and a good kind of brain condition, and good mental condition. So our head should be working with enough nutrients. So we should take, actually, right ingredients for our body to work. And all these technologies produced by Google and other companies are actually very helpful in terms of controlling our eating habits and dietary habits. So if we, I think, are well and correctly fed, so we will be actually living in a happier way. Some of the technologies like urban farming, for example, at the moment sounds like a fantasy, but as we will have more and more people living in cities, we may see more people actually growing their food near their homes. And this is also very sustainable in the fact that the food doesn't have to be transported from far distances, and then it will be fresh and a good quality and consumed actually near the spot where it is produced. And all these technologies will certainly help to achieve these targets. And another thing is about the innovation related to that. So innovation is actually mentioned all over the place. So it became almost like a taboo in everybody's heads. How are we going to innovate? Where to look at? We have actually all the capitals, okay? Money as one of them, but actually we have the main capital, our head and brain. So we have our wisdom, we have the information, and the combination of information and wisdom will then create income and good quality of life, and hopefully in a more sustainable way. Thank you.
Спасибо. И еще буквально один вопрос, и, к сожалению, мы
можно я
будем
отвечу?
заканчивать.
Вот там еще был
Да,
вопрос,
конечно.
что
May I please also answer, what will Google do in order for people to consume less?
те, кто их купит, уже как бы
The Google company has created a number of new earphones, which are very expensive, and a lot of people cannot actually use them. Therefore, will have no access to this advertisement. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I would like to comment on Dominique's presentation when he says that the state ought to draw the line and the framework of new technology. And I would like to say a few words on blockchain, which will change the economy in the future. It's great that there are representatives of the central bank and the Ministry for Economic Development. I'd like to ask you, do you have a consensus or a common point of view on blockchain? When are we going to introduce this technology into administration and in the economy and cryptocurrency? Is it going to be a national cryptocurrency? Or an international one? And Ksenia, you mentioned that it is possible to introduce master chain. Would you like to comment on master chain in greater detail? Right. So I'm from Moscow, from Sberbank, by the way. As far as blockchain is concerned, I'd like to say what we're saying in that respect. We're working in a number of projects. One of the ministries we work with is a Russian registrar, which uses blockchain, which allows to cut costs and create smart contracts on the sales of land plots. And we're testing this technology on the basis of the information produced by land registrar. And we hope to produce the results next year in order to analyze them and what the results are and what benefits the population gets from them. The other thing is we're trying to optimize the purchases within the ministry, and we're also transferring it to blockchain technology. The other thing that we were discussing today is checking competencies. This is what we want to use blockchain for in order to analyze the competencies of the representatives of the Ministry for Economic Development and create a database on these on all of our, or for all of our employees. And I think that the government will find efficient and effective way of using these technologies. As far as technologies are concerned, I've already said that blockchain is one of the subtypes of distributive registrars. it's going to be a distributive registrar without blocks. I know that other central banks are testing distributive registrars within blockchain. And technologically, they seem quite sound. Nevertheless, I'd like to say that this technology is quite raw, and we continue to experiment with them. We cannot use it on a mass scale. We cannot simply use raw technology in the system because we have to take risks into account. Of course, new technologies are going to be used, possibly not in the way they are presented right now, but adapted to the future. And therefore, we have the FinTech Association, which deals with these projects, which deals with testing of such technologies. As far as cryptocurrency is concerned, it's a difficult issue. What is cryptocurrency? What's the use of cryptocurrency? It's a technology which allows you to conduct payments very quickly between banks and different countries. But as if I understand correctly, the initial use of Bitcoin presupposes higher payments along the line because the system stops paying for the payment itself, and the user keeps accumulating different fees in order to get access to the payment, and payments become more expensive. So international payments is a huge problem. International payments between different banks are very expensive. Within Sberbank, I can quite easily pay anything. Well, for instance, if I need. For instance, Maxim Stanislavich, it's easy to pay within Sberbank, isn't it? Oh, you're with another bank, aren't you? So with Sberbank and through Sberbank Online, it takes me only 2 seconds to pay. I don't need blockchain for that. VTB clients have more problems. They experience problems in that respect. So we, as CBs, create a retail payment system. And within Russia, it's going to solve these problems in order to make it easier for clients of other banks to communicate with each other. For B2B, this complex of problems will be resolved. Banks that are interested in simplification and making international payments less expensive. IBM has produced a new technology based on blockchain or other distributive ledger, which allows these international trade transactions to become less expensive. The rest of cryptocurrency is buying cryptocurrency or mining cryptocurrency with the objective of driving its cost. Now, this is closer to the notion of a bubble. So there are quite a number of sufficient risks that we need to bear in mind, and central banks are quite seriously warning everyone that the asset that is growing in price only because it's growing in price is a sign of a bubble. I'd like to add a few words about cryptocurrencies by way of a joke. Ksenia was saying that transaction costs are growing for the need of more computation technology to be used. If AI wanted to win the world, the only thing it would have to do is to use Bitcoin, because the computation technologies and powers are growing. There are more and more mining farms, and these computation farms and computation technologies could be used by the bank to pay for such computation technologies. This is a first step to conquering the world. The majority of our participants think that cyber technologies will win, and there will be no artificial intelligence that will be able to hack it. By the way, there was no question on which knowledge and competencies are essential in order to become a financier, economist, and I hope that the participants of today's seminar will be able to signify the global trends and follow them.